James faces a life or death decision when his old enemy threatens his family. Will he sacrifice his company, everything he has built, to save his loved ones? This gripping story will keep you on the edge of your seat. James, a successful man with his own company, is suddenly thrown into a life or death struggle when his old enemy, John, kidnaps his mother and Diep, the woman he loves, to blackmail him. John, once a close friend and business partner of James, is now a ruthless enemy who threatens to kill James' family if he doesn't hand over the company. Caught in a race against time, James is faced with a terrible choice. Will he sacrifice his career, everything he has worked so hard to build, to save his family? Or will he find a way to rescue his loved ones without losing the most important things in his life? In this battle, James faces not only a dangerous enemy but also his own fears and concerns about the future. Ultimately, with the help of the police, James successfully saves Diep and his mother. The story ends in emotional relief, as James realizes that family is the most important thing in life, more than any success. If you enjoy thrilling and intense stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our future videos. The night sky had turned dark and heavy, as if foreshadowing something ominous. On the 20th floor of a brightly lit office building, James was still working, his eyes tense as they scanned through financial reports. Lately, his company had been plagued by setbacks, broken contracts, partners pulling out without explanation. James knew someone was manipulating things from the shadows, and one name burned clearly in his mind: John. John had once been his closest friend, a partner from the early days of their startup. But greed had turned John into a stranger. When James discovered he had been embezzling funds and abusing the company's name for personal gain, he didn't hesitate to sever all ties, removing John from the board of directors. That was when the grudge began. His phone buzzed. A hidden number flashed on the screen, no contact name, no information. James frowned, then answered. A cold, steel-edged voice came through. "I have Diep and your mother. If you call the police, they won't make it out alive." James froze. His heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst. In that moment, every sound around him disappeared. He stood up, his hand gripping the phone until his knuckles turned white. Diep, the woman he loved deeply. His mother, the woman who had raised him with endless care and sacrifice. They were his whole world. And now, that world was being held in the hands of a man who had lost every trace of humanity. "What do you want?" James growled, struggling to keep calm. The voice on the other end chuckled darkly. "Transfer all your company shares to me, along with full access to your bank accounts and confidential files. You have 24 hours. After that, I'll start sending you Diep's fingers, one by one." The call cut off. No goodbye. No chance to negotiate. Only the sound of a long, cold dial tone, like a knife slicing through his ear, again and again. James slumped into his chair, his hands trembling as he braced against the desk. His thoughts spiraled. His heart felt like it was being ripped apart by two cruel choices: obey John and hand over everything, throwing away years of hard work and betraying hundreds of employees who depended on him, or take the risk and call the police, gambling with the lives of the two people he loved most. He bit his lips so hard it bled. What was he supposed to do? Just a few hours ago, he'd been talking to Diep about their upcoming trip to Diep. She'd laughed brightly and said she'd buy them matching sweaters. His mother had called to remind him to eat properly. All those ordinary, beautiful moments now felt like distant memories. James stood up and walked over to a small cabinet next to his desk. He opened the bottom drawer, the one where he kept the most personal things no one else knew about. He pulled out an old photograph, his mother and Diep, holding hands by the seaside, smiling as the sun set behind them. The golden light in the photo cast a gentle peace on their faces. He stared at the picture, as if begging it to give him an answer. At that moment, he wasn't James, the CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation. He was just a son, a man on the edge of losing everything. He couldn't let them be hurt. And he couldn't let John get away with this, not for another second. James set the photo down, pulled out a sticky note, and scribbled a sentence with shaky hands. "I'll bring you both home safely. No matter what it takes." After hours of sitting motionless in the dark, his mind in turmoil with hundreds of conflicting thoughts, James knew he could no longer remain silent. He was not the kind of man who could sacrifice the lives of his loved ones to keep his company. But he was also not someone who would succumb to the threats of a criminal like John. He had to act, intelligently, decisively, and quickly. As the first light of dawn began to break, James drove straight to the city's police headquarters. His face was gaunt, his eyes dark from lack of sleep, but his gaze remained cold and determined. He met directly with the head of the Criminal Investigation Unit, Lieutenant Hong, and laid out the entire situation, the past relationship with John, the rifts after the incident, and the kidnapping threat call the night before. He didn't hide any detail, even handing over his phone to help trace the unknown number. The police immediately sprang into action. Technical experts traced the call data, while they checked security cameras around James's mother's house and the routes Diep frequently traveled. Within a few hours, leads began to surface. A suspicious van was seen near his mother's house at the time she went missing, and it was recorded heading toward the outskirts of the city. By cross-referencing the route and the fluctuating signal from a phone that had been turned off, they pinpointed a suspicious location, an abandoned house deep in a sparse forest, a property that had been a deserted farm for years. James was brought into the operations room, where he could monitor the entire rescue operation on a large screen. His heart pounded fiercely. Every time the camera focused on the house, he held his breath. All he could think of were two images, his mother's gentle gaze and deep smile. Were they tied up, gagged? Were they in pain, terrified? Every second felt like a knife cutting into his soul. James said nothing, sitting motionless, his eyes fixed on the screen, his hands gripping so tightly that his knuckles turned white. At exactly 13:47, the special forces suddenly raided the house. The images became chaotic, screams echoed, people ran in panic, the camera shook violently. James leaned forward, his mouth dry, sweat pouring down his forehead. He thought his heart had stopped when a gunshot rang through the walkie-talkie. But just a few minutes later, Lieutenant Huang's voice came through clearly and firmly. The target has been neutralized. The hostages are safe. James collapsed into his chair. He cried for the first time in many years. Not out of weakness, but because emotions that had been suppressed for so long exploded in that one moment. His heart overflowed with an indescribable emotion. He couldn't believe his ears. Tears streamed down his face, as if they had been held back for too long. Diep and his mother were found in a small room at the back of the house, tied up and gagged, but not seriously injured. Both were mentally shaken, but still alert. When they were taken to the ambulance, James's mother looked around, confused at first, then her eyes landed on him. She smiled, overwhelmed with emotion, and immediately began crying. Diep rushed into his arms, holding him tightly as if afraid that if she let go, everything would vanish. The two women, in their tears of happiness, seemed to have come back to life. At the scene, when Diep and his mother were let out, James rushed towards them and hugged them tightly. Unable to hold back his emotions, he broke down in tears like a child. His tears were not just from the fear that had passed, but from the guilt, love, and gratitude for still having his loved ones with him. "I'm sorry. I let everything happen. I'm really sorry." Diep rested her head on James' shoulder, whispering softly, "I've always believed in you. I knew you would never abandon me." In that embrace, James realized success and wealth were not true victories. The real triumph was protecting the people he loved at any cost. Despite the chaos and urgency of the scene, there was a moment of stillness as the three of them stood together, leaning on each other, enveloped in warmth and love. James felt the priceless value of every second. He had once thought that work and success defined his life, that money and power would help him achieve everything. But in this moment, he realized something simple. There was nothing more valuable than protecting the ones he loved. Diep still held him tightly, as if to say that she would never leave him, that all the anxiety and horror of the past days were behind them, and now only happiness remained. His mother stood beside them, her eyes full of pride and love. Everything that had happened was now in the past, every pain forgotten, leaving only the reunion and peace they had longed for. James didn't know what to say. He simply remained silent, burying his head in Diep's soft hair, inhaling the familiar scent, feeling closer to her than ever. His tears fell on Diep's shoulder like a late apology. He choked out, "I'm sorry. I let everything happen." I'm really sorry." Those words couldn't fully express what he felt. He had let everything get out of control, allowed his loved ones to suffer things they didn't deserve. But now, when they were still alive, when they were still here with him, he felt as if he had been born again. Diep gently shook her head, smiling and saying, "No. I believe in you. I knew you would never leave me." Her words were like a soft lullaby, soothing the wounds in his heart. A sense of happiness and gratitude rose within him. He had protected the ones he loved, even if it was just for this moment, but it was a victory that was beyond measure. John, the criminal who had caused so much pain and fear, was finally being escorted away by the police. His gaze no longer held the arrogance and self-confidence it once had, but only desperation and madness. He had lost, not only because his plan had failed, but because he didn't understand that when a man fights for his family, nothing can defeat him. John had allowed greed and hatred to cloud his judgment, while James had protected the people who mattered most to him with all the courage, intelligence, and love he possessed. Now that everything was over, James could only sit in this moment of reunion with Diep and his mother, silently thanking life for giving him the opportunity to keep them. Life would undoubtedly present more challenges, but at least he had found the answer. Protecting his family was the true victory. This story truly left a strong impression on me due to the tension and the challenging decisions that the character James faces. The relationship between him and John, from close friends to dangerous enemies, creates a very special layer of drama. James' internal conflict, when choosing between his company and his family, made me sympathize and understand that sometimes life cannot be just about money or success. The most important thing is the people we love and the protection of them. The emergence of dramatic situations, like rescuing his mother and Diep, makes the story even more captivating. Anyone in James' situation would feel desperate and have to make difficult decisions. But in the end, the message the story delivers is about love, courage, and sacrifice.